Hi, my name is Bente, I'm the Norse Witch, and this week's video is sponsored by my YouTube members and patrons because they requested this video topic. I was asked to show a home warding spell in a video, so here it goes. This home warding spell is meant to keep out other people's negative energies, any hexes or curses sent your way, the evil eye, and things like that. It is not supposed to keep out spirits, so in case you want that, I would suggest you layer that with another spell. And I decided not to do anything fancy, but to show you a very accessible, very classic pre-Christian Scandinavian spell. So naturally, we are working with runes as well as blood. So in case you don't want to use blood, that's totally fine. You can exchange that for beetroot juice or red paint. And also, of course, trigger warning, if you don't want to see blood, then better not watch this video. What makes the spell extremely accessible is that you basically only need two things. Wood or bark from a protective tree, so for example I would suggest oak or rowan wood or bark, but you can use any tree that you feel like has protective qualities. And bonus points if you already have a relationship with this tree. I personally feel like if you can get the aid of this tree for this spell, because you already have this working relationship, then that makes this spell even more powerful. But don't fret if you do not have a relationship with a protective tree, you can also use any kind of protective tree wood. The next thing that you need is any kind of knife that you can carve the wood with. Of course, iron would be perfect for this because iron has very protective qualities, but if you have any other wood carving knife, that is also totally fine. I don't know if mine is iron. The first thing that we do for this spell is to carve the wood down a little bit to give it an even texture that is easier to work with. Of course, you don't necessarily have to do this, especially if you are a very talented wood carver, but I personally am not very used to working with wood, in case that wasn't very obvious from my lack of skills in this video. But for me, working with the wood is much easier if it has an even surface to work with. And there is another advantage to putting in all of this work to create this smooth surface. It usually takes quite some time, especially if you work with oak wood, as I do, because it's kind of hard to work with, because it is a very hard kind of wood. So while you are carving away at this piece of wood, you can take all of this time to basically go into a little trance and to put a lot of energy and intention into this working. A very classic way to do this is, of course, visualizing the intention of the spell. So for example, with this home warding spell, you could visualize a fiery wall around your home, holding away any kind of negative energy. But you can of course also visualize it in a completely different manner. Anything that screams protection to you works and is allowed here. But of course, you also do not have to do it by visualizing. I, for example, am a person that usually does things with feelings and emotions. So while I am carving away at this piece of wood, for example, I am focusing on raising my own energy and then infusing it with a feeling, an emotion of feeling protected, and then channeling that energy into the piece of wood. As I already said, the spell in this video, or at least the type of spell that I show you in this video, is a very classic pre-Christian Scandinavian spell. We see attestations of these kinds of workings in multiple sagas. In all of these sagas, one specific rune is carved into an object 3 times for a specific purpose, and a lot of the times this object is some kind of wood. A lot of the times the object is then charged with blood and then placed or hidden somewhere to work its magic. The purposes of these spells in the sagas are various different kinds. There are workings with this type for fertility, for healing, but also, for example, for cursing. One account is especially interesting because it mentions carving the rune Tivas 3 times for victory, and there is actually an archaeological find that includes a bind rune made of 3 Tivas runes on a little bracteate. So if you want to believe it, I kind of feel like this ties back to the saga. So you guessed it, the next step after smoothing the surface of this protective piece of wood is to carve 3 runes into it. For this spell, I naturally chose the rune Algis because it is the protective rune. Protection is basically its main meaning, so I work it into basically any kind of protective spell that works with runes, in any kind of protective bind rune or symbol. I chose to carve one rune 3 times here because it ties back to the sagas, but of course, if you would prefer a bind rune, then of course that would also be totally fine. I just personally have not seen this being mentioned in the sagas, so that's why I personally opted for a simple rune 3 times. This is how mine came out. Definitely not perfect, could be much prettier and much neater, but it doesn't have to be pretty, it just has to work, you just have to be able to recognize the runes. While carving this piece of wood and while smoothing its surface, of course you have already infused it with a lot of your energy and your intention, but of course it would be great to give this spell a little bit of life. And since in the sagas it is mentioned multiple times that this was done with blood, that is what I also opted to do. If you have already watched my blood magic video, then you already know that you don't need a huge knife for this. I personally use single-use diabetes lancets, because that is a very simple and safe way to draw just 1 drop of blood, and you don't need more than that. Charging a talisman with your blood not only provides it with a huge boost of energy because you're literally feeding it with your life force, but in my personal experience, the more you charge an object, a sigil or anything like that with your blood, and the more you feed it, the more it will kind of develop its own little spirit and it will literally come to life. And that is very interesting and actually perfect for a protective ward. And the last thing I decided to do was to use some incense and say an incantation to basically tell the talisman again what it's supposed to do. You don't have to do that, it's not mentioned in the sagas or anything. I just really like incense.
May all people in this house be protected from harm, no matter if from other people, from spirits, or from the evil eye, or from negative energy.
So now the only thing left to do, as mentioned in the sagas, is to take the talisman and hide it somewhere where it makes sense. So of course somewhere in your house. For example, at your hearth or in your altar. And I would personally suggest you recharge this talisman once a month with your blood, so that, as I already mentioned, you are awakening a little spirit, and that will make it even more effective. I hope you like this little home warding spell, and as always, I will see you in another video. Bye!